There we go. I'm having all kinds of technical difficulties this morning. Sorry, friends. Thank you for sticking with me. I apologize for that. We're having audio issues here this week. Hello, friends. Welcome back to a 1D10T Does Stuff, and I'm the 1D10T in charge, Trevor Stewart 1308. Sorry for the late and rough start. We are having audio issues this week. We are going to be reading from Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings today. But before we get started with that, let me say that today's pre-rolls brought to you by the Hidden Leaf, downtown Charlottesville, 105 West Main Street, on the downtown mall, above the bricks, Suite 200. A great place to go with some great buds to get some great buds. Hey, bud, and the only thing better than their bud is their customer service. Also, they have the lowest prices in town, according to my own personally highly biased research, by which I mean I was incredibly high when I did my personally biased research. A note. Oh, don't forget to check the website for times and events. The website is The Hidden Leaf. TheHiddenLeafCville.com. That's TheHiddenLeafCville, all one word.com, where you can find events such as Frosty Fridays, where you can find our other two sponsors, Kush Gang, also findable on Instagram at KG 434 KG Snacks 434. I am just all discombobulated today. And our other sponsor, Firehouse, where there's smoke, there's Firehouse. A note of disclaimer, we will be covering some difficult topics today, and I will be expressing some opinions. I need to move some stuff so that I can see chat. There we go. Jeez. All sorts of unprepared. Even my dangling chads are in the way. Sorry about all of this, friends. Any opinions you hear expressed today belong to me, the expresser of the opinion, the channel, and or our parent company, but do not necessarily belong to any of our advertisers, including Kush Gang, Firehouse, and the Hidden Leaf. I am all sorts of off my game today. Cheese and crackers, friends. I'm so sorry. Alright, I'm gonna have to move these so that I can actually see what I'm doing here. Everything. Just everything. Tuck my dangling chads up out of the way. That has got to sound strange to y'all. Well, alright, friends. That's the ad read out of the way. Technical difficulties attempting to be explained. Oh, geez, that's opinion. Everything, just everything. Okay, I think we've got it here. I think we're good. So, we are, let me do a quick explanation of Tuesday streams. We are building up context around the idea that the medical institutions in the United States of America are at best fumbling for words too. The medical institutions in the United States of America are at best dismissive of marginalized people, and at worst are dangerous to marginalized people. Specifically, we're trying to work our way to looking at uh, the danger that Black women face from the mental and emotional and behavioral health institutions in the United States. However, I am an idiot and I am not trained in any of this. And you guys are, when you watch this, you guys are watching me working on putting actual thoughts together to come up with fully realized ideas. Fully realized might be a bit of a stretch, but yeah, what you're watching is my best attempt at this. So that's why we are reading books for context. Especially now, I have, like I've said before, I've already read this. That's why you're gonna find passages underlined. There are cards with notes on them throughout and stuff like that. Now, when I read this, this was the first sort of, this was the book I read to get myself moving in this direction, to sort of the first step on the path. And I'm glad I read it. It helped a lot. It gave me a really good idea of sort of what I'm looking at. But also it was, I feel like, a whole lot of information all at once, and maybe I would have been better served. Pardon me. Maybe I would have been better served starting with Sickened or Inflamed. The other two books that I have read on stream. I feel like those books would have given me some. I think taking a look at what things are like now and then going back and looking at how we got here would have done more for me than looking at how we got here and then where we are now. Of course, this is my own fault because I designed the syllabus. I made the decisions about what direction I was going to do this in. I do think that it is good for me to be revisiting this book now after having read the others. That I think I'm going to get more out of it this time than I got out of it the first time. And a large part of that is probably because of the added experience I've had through the other books that I've read. Sounds good anyway. So, get yourself something comfy. Smoke them if you got them, as they say. And we're gonna dive right into this. Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings. There we go. Alright, I apologize again for the noise because I am adjusting the microphone. This microphone is a little less its pickup range is not as large as the other microphone I usually use. I usually use a Shure SM, an SM58 dynamic mic, or not not dynamic, uh, but an SM58. Um, and it's a very good microphone, uh, considering that it's not a dynamic mic, that it doesn't have, uh, it doesn't process sound in quite the same way. It's not powered, it's not as strong. It is, however, it's good at capturing sound up close and filtering out background noise, or stuff that's not near as close. Which is why you see singers screaming into it, trying to be heard over drums. This is a Samson S1. It's acceptable. Its dynamic range is pretty good. It does not pick up near as well as the Shure, but its sound usually is pretty good. Especially in the vocal range. But I don't particularly want to keep using it on a regular basis for these vocals, this vocal processing. It is not quite as sensitive as I want. I have no idea why what happened to the other one, it's not the mic itself, I'm not sure if it's the preamp IO box. I don't know. So there's some things I'm going to have to check after stream to see if I can get the other one working right. But yeah, so that's a nice boring side tangent there. Again, I apologize for that. Hey, that moves. All right, so now where we left off was cheese and crackers. Trevor, get your stuff together. All right. There we go. That seems a little better. Where did we leave off? I think we were on this paragraph. But we're going to jump back a paragraph. What we were talking about, though, are these discourses in the early Renaissance about beauty, and about how at the time, while what was being considered beautiful was a woman of an average size, whatever that meant. It was still, larger was preferable to smaller, to skinnier. And what we are working up to here is how this changed. What we have been working on here is background about how things were before it changed. And what we are working up to is how things changed. We're going to go ahead and back up one paragraph. Uh, we had just gotten through this discourse that had been written by um who was writing this? Castiglione or Firenzuola? Firenzuola. Firenzuola. These yeah, early Renaissance artists. Italian Renaissance, not I mean the Italian Renaissance was the early Renaissance, but what we mean is specifically these artists in the Italian Renaissance. Y'all gonna see how I failed history. I was not good at history class. All right. Yes, after this discourse between Kelso and Selvaggia on the beauty of women illustrates the value placed on fleshy feminine forms in Rome, an artistic and intellectual hub of the Renaissance. It professed preference for plump and proportionate figures, echoed the sentiments expressed in the Book of the Courtier. Yet, unlike Castiglione's masterwork on the beauty of women included declared preference for fat over thin women, this declaration simultaneously harkened back to Durer and presaged the growing praise for voluptuous figures that was to come in the world of art and feminine aesthetics. Though Firenzuola himself mingled with many of the important figures of his time, he never attained the recognition for his work that Castiglione or Raphael had. Still, many 20th and 21st century scholars have returned to his work for its insights into 16th century aesthetics. Firenzuola shared much with the literati of Rome. While there, he contracted syphilis, the same illness that many contemporary many contemporary scholars believed felled Raphael. His contraction of syphilis had the seeming effect of restoring his devotion to God. He returned to the monastery in 1538, becoming an abbot at the San Salvatore monastery in Prato, where he remained until his death in 1543. Firenzuola did not make any mention of dark-skinned women in his book. In contrast to the Low Countries, where Durer had encountered Katharina, African slaves were a minimal presence in Rome and many other major Italian centers. This was not the case, however, in Venice. Dark-skinned captives had been brought to the region since the Crusades. The slave trading enterprise in this way expanded rather than introduced the population of forced black laborers in the region. By 1490, when the trade in captured Africans became a bona fide industry, there was already a visible population of Africans in Italy. Venice, a vital center of the Italian Renaissance, was also a key trading destination. By the late 15th century, ships bearing African captives were a common sight in the seaport. And whereas many earlier waves of Africans arriving in the region were largely male, by 1490, a sizable number of black women could be seen among the newly imported vassals. The introduction of a significant population of black women and girls in the city made them, in many respects, a hot commodity. Their presence signaled both the exotic lands beyond the sea and the European conquests of said lands. For these reasons, black women and girls maids retained as maidservants became a fashionable accessory for aristocratic Italian women. Ew. This much was evident in a letter composed by Isabella Este in 1491. Isabella, the new Marquess of Mantua, Marquis of Mantua, was a respected cultural and political figure. She was also a patron of the arts and a lady of fashion. In her letter, written in May of that year, she badgered her agent in Venice to acquire una moretta. Why do I feel like I said something bad there? A young black girl to serve as her maidservant. Oh, it's for more. Emphasizing that the girl should be as black as possible. Just, again, man, fetishizing other humans is ew. A month later, Isabella wrote to her sister-in-law, Anna Sforza, revealing that this was to be her second black maidservant. Of her original, slightly older maidservant, she writes, "We couldn't be more pleased with our black girl, even if she were blacker, because from being at first a little disdainful, she has now become pleasing in words and acts, and we think she'll make the best buffoon in the world." Ew. With the growing presence of black girls and women in Italy came a new interest in their artistic portrayal. Black men had been presented in frescoes exalting biblical scenes since the 13th century, a black man having been venerated as one of the three kings in the Magus tradition. The Black Magus tradition. But representations of black women in religious images had been far fewer. The rise of the slave trade in Venice led to the rapid incorporation of black women into a variety of religious, domestic, and mythological scenes. They were typically rendered as the physically alluring social inferiors to white women, a representation that refined social distinctions. This was the artistic cultural milieu into which Titan landed as an adolescent in the early 16th century. The actual date of Titan's birth is unknown. However, scholars believe that he was nearly 12 when he was sent from his hometown in Cadore to the city of Venice to apprentice as a painter. From then until 1510, Titan apprenticed with the Bellini family, the city's best known painters. Magus? Yeah, the one of the Magi, there was a long-standing tradition that one of the three Magi uh, at Christ's birth was black. Um, I'm pretty sure it's gotten whitewashed since then, but yeah, they were supposed to be. I think they were supposed to represent um the broad cultures of man at the time. All of this coming from someone who is not Christian nor has really deeply studied the Bible, and just something I picked up on at one point. By the way, hey Maddie, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Uh, and to anybody else who'd been trying to get a watch stream, I apologize for ruining that yesterday with my test stream and not streaming long enough for anybody to actually show up. So I apologize wrecking anybody's watch streaks. Um, so yeah. And also, again, now that there are actually people here watching, I want to apologize for any sound issues going on. I'm having I'm having technical issues with some sound equipment that I will be fixing post stream, hopefully. Hopefully. Uh, and apparently, we're about to start talking about Titan. Uh, who apprenticed to the Bellini family. Again, history, not my strong suit. Uh, Titan apprenticed with the Bellini family, the city's best known painters. Some critics argued that his talent outstripped that of the Bellinis even upon his arrival, but by the time the two most acclaimed painters of the Bellini family, Giorgione and Giovanni, had died, Titan had become the undisputed master of the Venetian school, a title he took with him to his death 60 years later. Titan was not to remain untouched by the conspicuous presence of Africans as servants in the regions. One of his earliest representations of an African was found in his 1523 portrait, Laura Dianti, and her page. Laura Dianti was known by many as the mistress of Alfonso d'Este, Isabella's brother. Her humble origins and uncertain status in court made the painting controversial. Yet the work also suggests her evolving social status, as she is shown next to her small black page boy who looks up at her admiringly. Nope. I thought that might I thought that might be the painting that my hand was covering up, but no. Um, Even as the growing fashion in the region was to procure black female servants, black male servants were still commonly used to represent black servitude in art. Laura Diante and her page was one of the earliest paintings to exemplify the domestic intimacy and social distance between Africans and Europeans. Black women also appeared in Titan's vast portfolio. Titan pulled these women into the iconography of proportionate and fleshy feminine beauties, making them the aesthetic equals of European women. This was the case in what is considered one of the artist's greatest works, Diana and Astion. In this 1559 painting, Titan reimagines a tale of the Roman poet Ovid's Metamorphosis. In the myth, Actaeon, I don't know why I had said Astion, a young hunter fresh from the day's kill, wanders aimlessly through the woods with his hunting dogs. He happens upon the sacred cave of the goddess and virgin huntress Diana while she is bathing. His presence sparks a flurry of activity as nymphs beat their breasts, warning Diana of Actaeon's violent entry into their hallowed dwelling. Suspicious of his intent and believing that he has penetrated the cave for the express purpose of seeing her undressed, Diana curses him by turning him into a deer. Later, his own dogs devour him, ensuring that he will tell no one what he saw. While the tale itself is a well rehearsed ancient myth, Titan adds a bit of colonial era titillation by introducing a black female attendant into the story. The attendant is at Diana's back, helping the goddess lift the cloth that would cover her nude body. The attendant is the only woman who is clothed. Her intelli- her inelegant striped frock and an artistic device signaling not her modesty but her status as other. Yet, along with this depiction of the servant's social status as inferior, Titan depicted her physique as no less alluring than that of the goddess. The attendant's plain smock slides off one shoulder as she reaches to assist Diana, revealing her own shapely form. The attendant's toned arm matches those of the nymphs bathing nearby. Indeed, there is similarity in the silhouettes of the many women present. The forms of the many women drawn reminiscent of Durer's plump, proportionate women, as well as the fleshy Venus of the late Florentine Republic, reveal a congruity in their voluptuousness. Each serves as a representation of the beauty of the female body that apparently transcend both color and social status. Titan may have been in a class by himself as an artist, but he had many peers among the Italian Renaissance notables when it came to the convention of reimagining tales from antiquity and inserting a black woman as the social subordinate yet physical analog to voluptuous and comely white women. Andrea Mantegna, court artist of Isabel d'Este, reimagined Judith in what many believe to be the first biblical allegory to incorporate a black woman. Judith was a widow depicted in the Old Testament as beautiful and chaste. She used her considerable womanly charms to gain entree into the tent of Holofernes, the enemy Assyrian general. When he fell asleep drunk, she beheads him with the aid of her handmaiden. Betraying the tension over the questionable attractiveness of the African face during the High Renaissance, Mantegna's first drawing of this biblical narrative, circa 1490, shows Judith grasping the general's heavy, lolling, decapitated head by the hair as an older, wizened black woman stoops down with an empty sack to collect the head. In a second portrayal of this scene, the maidservant is young, perhaps younger than Judith. In this portrait, the servant's facial features are presumptively African, yet like Katharina, also attractive. In both paintings, the servant is as voluptuous as well built as Judith. Mantegna's use of a black woman as a handmaiden in an iconic Christian story was telling. At once evocative and firmly rooted in the reconstituted or late 15th century cultural scene in which it was drawn. Mantegna's work reconstituted aristocratic white women's servants as having always been black. But black women's subjectivity and subordination did not diminish their bodily beauty. Essentially, they rewrote history. After Mantegna, many other artists reproduced the scene of Judith and Holofernes, featuring a winsome black handmaiden. Paolo Veronese produced late 16th century paintings of Judith that evoked Mantegna. One painted between 1582 and 1585 shows a young, contemplative, and buxom Judith being assisted by her seemingly black servant. The servant's face is careworn, which may be an indication of her age, or alternatively, a way an attempt to illustrate African physiognomy in a way that bespoke a harshness or unattractiveness. The servant in Veronese's portrait is nevertheless sexually alluring in build. Her tone largely bare upper her toned largely bare upper torso extends towards the viewer. Her cleavage, like Judith's, sits on display in the center of the frame, commanding an erotic attention. The viewer's gaze is drawn more to the sensuality of the women than the triumphant act of decapitation, which in the biblical tale saves Judith's city from enemy plunder. Veronese's version of Judith was composed only a few years before his death in 1588. By this time, he had lived in Venice for 35 years, and if Titan was, in the estimation of many, the unrivaled master of Venetian art, Veronese was esteemed for his beautiful, if often controversial, rendition of biblical tales and classical myths. In these works, he was fond of including Africans in scenes in which they had previously been absent. No painter, in fact, during the 200-year span between the late 15th and late 17th century that marked the simultaneous rise of both the slave trade and the Renaissance throughout Europe, painted more scenes featuring black figures. That has a bit of a fetishist feel to it in a way. Uh, the I mean the whole thing about how these painters depict women in general has a fetishist feel to it. Uh, it feels though some of these guys, it feels like they really are just very much fetishizing black women, black people in general. I don't I don't have the words to back up what I'm saying or to clarify what I'm saying there, but it has the vibes. It has the ick vibe. And it'd be neat if it wasn't if he weren't so if the subordination weren't so insidious in this and the rewriting of history uh, so sinister. You know, this feels like it's sort of, oh, this is the way it is because it's the way it's always been, the way it always will be. Uh, and that has a sinister feeling to it. Um, and then uh, the sexualization of these women, sexualization and subordination of these women. I think that's what makes it feel creepy. Um, I mean, both things are creepy in and of themselves, but put together, it's extra creepy. His frequent incorporation of black people into his work did more than raise a few eyebrows. He was at one point subject to trial for what was described as his misrepresentations of the good book. His sentence to correct the offending piece so that it accurately reflected scripture. Most of Veronese's figures were of black men and children, but an unidentified student of his style and purported member of the school of Paolo Veronese presented a portrait of a young black woman that remains a significant contribution to the collection of black women in Renaissance art. All right, that seems a little less. That one right there seems a little less. I don't know, fetishizing. I don't know. Um, most of Veronese is in the school of however. The painting, Portrait of a Moorish Woman, is a bust of a bejeweled African woman in simple garb that recalls Durer's Katharina. This painting, which was completed around 1550, shows none of the melancholy that was evident in Durer's portrait. The unidentified Moorish woman is marked through her skin color, facial featuring, and facial features and dazzling jewels as African. Her plain vestments are arranged in a bit of peekaboo pageantry that conveys the influence of Veronese. They also remind the viewer of her otherness and her social station, even as her womanly charms are on full display. I don't think of that as full display, but I may be reading this through, I may be looking at that painting through present day eyes. Uh, and for the time that may have been quite salacious. In which case it is fetishist and ew. But I don't know for sure. I'm 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 willing to defer to the opinions of experts. Each of the three major centers of 16th century Renaissance artistic production had a distinctive identity. Despite differences in method and execution, when it came to considerations of feminine attractiveness, Durer's mathematical calculations, the Florentine Academy's neoclassicism, and the Venetian voluptuousness were all united by the notion that beauty was found in proportionality and that fleshiness was pleasing to the eye. Such similarities are not surprising. The artist did not live in creative silos. Surviving reports reveal that artists like Dürer traveled throughout Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands to finish commissioned pieces. But none of those countries are Finland. I'm sorry. They also uncover the creative love affair between artists in the various regions. Raphael and Dürer apparently exchanged prints of their works, each known to admire the work of the other. In Venice, Titian's crush on Dürer bordered on infatuation, and Dürer noted his concern that the artist was simply copying his work. This concern, it seems, was not unfounded. But it was also not without a hint of irony, given his own dogged attempts to pinch the secrets of execution of the Venetian artist Barbary. It is perhaps because of the shared influences and similarities across the regions that for centuries no one knew who sculpted the first African Venus. The statue was the statue was originally ascribed to Don, Danese Cataneo, an Italian sculptor who produced much of his work in Venice. This view was later discredited, and the sculpture was attributed to other artists in Florence, northern Italy, and even France. In recent years, a Netherland named Johann Gregor van der Stadt, Schart, Johann Gregor van der Schart, not helping, who studied in Italy before being employed by the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II, has been credited with its creation. The African Venus has many of the same attributes as the classical and neoclassical paintings and statues of Venus, including the framed Venus de' Medici statue that was known to be part of the Medici family collection by the late 16th century. Like the Venus de' Medici, the African Venus was of similarly proportionate medium build and fleshy. The blackness of the African Venus is marked by more than just her bronze coloring. The features of her face are also paradigmatically African. Her curly hair is covered by a non-decorative headdress, a detail unique to the African Venus statues. Also unique to these statues, in one hand she holds a cloth, presumably used to polish the mirror held in the other, into which she gazes longingly. The African Venus represents a curious play on Venus iconography. On the one hand, the sculpture fits within the prevailing idiom of beauty, representing the refined tastes of the ruling elite of Europe circulating during the Renaissance. Her rounded, elongated limbs speak to the influence of the Mannerist period, which extended approximately from the 1520s to the 1580s. But because she is black, the sculptor also used some markers to indicate her low social status. The African Venus carries a long cloth. The African Venus carries a cloth rag and wears a headdress that may signify that she is a domestic servant. Black female servants were more often fitted with simple headdresses as was the case with Durer's Katharina. Well, if you're gonna go, go. Thank you. Titan's Diana and Veronese's Judith. The African Venus is, moreover, immodest, in a prelude to ideas about Africans that would be developed over the next several centuries. The African Venus is lacking in shame, whereas Europeanized Venus Pudica covers her pubis and breasts. The African Venus is mesmerized by her own beauty as she gazes wistfully at her own reflection. There are 13 known African Venus statues, each of a similar design as that purportedly crafted by van der Schart. Not helpful name, dude. In the 1580s. Oh, purportedly crafted by van der Schart in the 1580s. It is possible that van der Schart's African Venus is one manifestation of hi, a profane or lowly Venus, neither exalted nor heavenly. Her earthly beauty and its holy physical manifestation would inspire lust, but not, as with the Venus Pudica, love. But a change was coming. Dun dun dun. In the 16th century, Italian masterworks, low status black women had been prized for their figures. But by the turn of the 17th century, black women were shifting from the aesthetic counterparts of European women to to their aesthetic counterpoints, their novelty having worn off in areas where the slave trade had been going on the longest. Black women's figures were being described as inferior. In the new proto-racist order, black women were increasingly deemed little, low, and foul. The plump aesthetic became more and more frequently associated with white women. At the same time, in England, a country that arrived relatively late to the transatlantic slave trade, a new trend was taking off among refined men: thinness. In English high society, philosophers had started to rethink the meaning of the fat male body. Voluptuousness in women was all well and good. Women were but the objects of men's fantasies. Fatness in men signaled a lack of self control or dimness. For elite men, slenderness became bodily proof of rationality and intelligence. And that is where we are going to leave it for today. Next week, we are going to start uh, plump women and thin, fine men, where we are going to start seeing the the transformation in towards fat phobia. Um, and that is coming up. So yeah, we'll start that next week. It's a short one today, I know. A large part of that is because I'm having technical difficulties. Uh, but also there wasn't that much left in that chapter. So thank you everyone for being here. Stick around for the raid. Thank you, Maddie Holmes. And thank you everyone else. Much love to all you lurkers out there. Oh yeah, there we go. Thank you, Maddie Holmes. Much love to all you lurkers out there. Stick around for the raid, and now is the time on the show when I say, as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down, the double deuces. I'm out, y'all.
Prosecuted them when you worked in the New York office. So usually with the mafia, there's transactional relationships. You know, I'm going to give you this. I expect something in return. I expect your loyalty. But beneath all of that is a threat. Like if you don't give me your loyalty, or if in spite of all my compliments to you, you betray me in some way, something's going to happen. Did you sense that beneath this conversation there was any kind of threat?
Well, certainly not the kind of threat that La Cosa Nostra, the mafia, would make explicit or implicit. And I don't mean by comparing Donald Trump's leadership culture to that of a mafia boss to suggest he's out there breaking legs or bombing shops when people don't make their payments. And I didn't get a sense of any kind of dark threat like that. But what I mean by the comparison is they're strikingly similar in the centrality of the boss and in there being no external reference points other than the boss. Most ethical leaders make judgments, hard judgments, by calling on some external reference points. A religious tradition, philosophy, logic, history, practice, something external to the leader. But in the mafia, and in my experience in Donald Trump's world, there are no external reference points. It's what is best for the boss. What will serve the boss best? How do we get the boss what he wants? It's all about me as the leader. And so I was very struck by it. And I tried not to reach that comparison because it seemed crazy when it first popped in my head. Really? La Cosa Nostra and the President of the United States? But it kept coming back to me because that style seemed familiar, and that's why it kept popping back into my head. So to answer your question, though, Terry, I didn't take it as a threat, any threat underneath the conversation, but I knew that I was going to be estranged to one degree or another from this president by virtue of my